Um, are you prepared for a possibility of opening and then reclosing? What are those conversations like for you and your team?
Sure. So, I think first and foremost, one of the critical components of any type of school reopening is that those are local decisions. And so the department is working closely with our superintendents to be able to go through those really tough choices about when to open and when to shut down the school building. And so one of the things that we have been just so impressed with Knox County, there's been some significant engagement. I think their continuous learning plan does help the department know what it would look like if a positive case is in the schools, but some really, really strong instructional models there. And I think that that's what we're focused on at the department.
And when you talk about, I know one of the task force was really pushing to get folks in that job database. What are these jobs that you're looking to fill and hire, and what does that look like? Is there a teacher shortage?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so across the country, there has been a shortage of teachers. And I know in Tennessee, about a third of our teachers are retirement eligible. And so we know that these are additional considerations that we have to take as an education field. And so certainly one of the things the department wants to do is to ensure that when districts have teachers or staff who cannot or should not be in school buildings, that there is an opportunity for them to have substitutes in place or additional support staff to ensure that children receive continuity in their own instruction.
Does that count? And I know a lot of this, like you said, goes to the district, but is that looking at substitute teachers to fill if, God forbid, a teacher contracts COVID?
Yeah, and so what we're looking at across the state is that there are going to be teachers who may have a positive case. There are going to be teachers who might need to quarantine because they had contact, whether that's at school or I think more often in their social and personal lives. We know that there's going to be quarantining and that's just going to continue. And so in those instances, just like when another staff member gets sick in other cases, we want to make sure we have enough substitutes. That's why we thought it was so important to have the substitute job board so that districts weren't scrambling to try to find people to continue educating our kids.
And I know virtual learning, obviously something that is a big part of this conversation. For you, what is your hope that things that districts adopt rather when it comes to students with learning disabilities or students with special needs if they are having to use virtual learning or in person?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one of the reasons why we know that learning in person is so important. Sometimes it's really difficult for children with disabilities, children who speak a language other than English, and our little ones. I've got two little ones, and the idea of them learning from a computer is going to be more challenging. And so we've seen districts prioritize those groups of students for in-person instruction when safe and when possible. But certainly the department's put out over $7 million in grants for students with disabilities to try to have the assistive technology for distance and remote services. But it is more challenging, and we applaud the incredibly hard work that's happening in East Tennessee on this front. People are doing a great job.
When you talk about additional funding, I know that was something else the task force talked about. What is that additional funding for? I'm sure there's a list.
I have a very long list. Yes. I'm never one to shy away from trying to get more resources for our schools and kids. But so we submitted a letter to Congress a week and a half ago that outlined our big priorities. But it's everything from instructional materials, technology, Wi-Fi, school nurses. But I will say that I've been very grateful. Governor Lee put $50 million aside for technology and then another $77 million aside for protective equipment and disinfecting materials specifically for classroom teachers. So those are the kinds of things that we need more investment in. And I think we're going to get additional stimulus from the federal government. And that'll help to make sure that we can keep all of our students and staff safe and healthy and have access to a high quality education.
I know that you have spoken in Washington, and I'm curious from your perspective. Tennessee's been in the headlines this week for you representing us, but also for a few districts that had either one or two students, or today we found out Hamblin has a case of 10 or 20 teachers. So it's kind of these two sides of it. How do you kind of balance both of those, where you're working and we're at the forefront of this, but at the same time, there are those who ask, are we opening too soon?
Yeah, and I'll be really candid that cannot imagine and have never lived through harder decisions. I see that with our superintendents and our principals and our parents who are making choices about what's best for their kids. You decide, and if we say, yes, you should open schools, we know that there are consequences to that, just like we know that there are consequences to keeping schools closed. And I think one of the hardest points is that people are starting to take sides and it's splitting the education community, when what I know to be true is regardless of how people feel about school openings, whether that should be in person or remotely, everybody cares about kids. Every single person I've talked to cares about keeping kids safe, keeping them educated, and keeping our staff and teachers safe and healthy. And so sometimes those things don't always jive in every single scenario. And so my heart goes out to everybody who's making those tough decisions. I haven't had a good night's sleep in months, but I think this is I think one of the big consequences of a pandemic. They're really, really hard choices, and I think everyone is taking them very seriously.
I mean, I know you were in Washington, but based on that, it seems like education isn't political for you. These decisions aren't political, so to speak.
Not at all. When we're talking about children, there is nothing political about that. I've got 2 kids who are in public schools here in the state. I'll have a third in a few years. And there's nothing political about my children. And I feel the same way about the other 1 million children in this state. This is about keeping them safe and healthy and well educated. And I think all the moms, dads, grandparents, aunts, uncles out there want, no matter what, to make sure that their kids are well taken care of. And that is the only thing that I'm focused on.